Before Titanic became the most famous ship in the world, it was one of the largest engineering problems anyone had ever attempted to solve. It would be longer than almost every building around it, heavier than anything its builders had ever assembled. So large that the shipyard meant to build it wasn't actually big enough to build it, not yet. New slipways had to be constructed. A crane, larger than anything in Belfast, had to be built just to hold the pieces in place. Thousands of workers had to invent new ways of working together, because no one had ever coordinated a project at this scale before. Every tool, every process, every piece of infrastructure the shipyard already owned had been designed for ships a fraction of this size. This is a story about a ship so large that building it meant rebuilding the entire industry around it first. So how do you build something bigger than the shipyard trying to build it? Chapter 1. The shipyard was too small. Harland and Wolff had built large ships before. They had never built anything close to this. Titanic and its sister ship Olympic were designed to be built side by side at the same time, which meant the shipyard needed to double its capacity before a single piece of steel was cut. 3 existing slipways were demolished to clear space for 2 new ones, each large enough to hold a hull nearly 900 feet long, with foundations reinforced to bear a weight the yard had never had to support before. Even that wasn't enough. The yard needed something to hold the ship's frame together while it was assembled piece by piece, high above the ground. Engineers built the Arrol Gantry, a steel structure over 200 feet tall, spanning both slipways, fitted with traveling cranes that could move enormous loads across the entire construction site. Workers could climb inside the gantry itself and move steel plates and frame sections to almost any point along either hull without waiting for a single overworked crane to free up. A separate floating crane, capable of lifting 200 tons, was brought in just to lower engines and boilers into place later. Before Harland and Wolff could build the Titanic, they first had to build a factory capable of building it, and they had to build 2 of everything because Olympic needed the exact same infrastructure at the exact same time. Chapter 2. Building a giant skeleton. With the shipyard finally ready, construction began the way every ship does, with a keel laid flat along the slipway. The spine the rest of the hull would be built around. From there, steel frames rose upward rib by rib, each one lifted into place and aligned against the ones before it. On a smaller ship, a small error in alignment barely matters. On a hull nearly 900 feet long, the same small error compounds with every additional frame, drifting further out of true the higher the structure climbed. Engineers had to check and recheck alignment constantly, because a mistake made early at the keel could throw the entire shape of the ship off by the time it reached the top deck. Thousands of individual steel components had to be measured, cut, and fitted in a specific sequence, each one dependent on the ones already in place. The larger the skeleton grew, the less room there was for error, and the frame was still empty. It had no skin yet. Chapter 3. The riveting problem. Titanic wasn't welded together. Welding strong enough for a hull this size didn't exist yet. Every steel plate covering that skeleton had to be fixed in place 1 rivet at a time, and the ship needed roughly 3 million of them. Each rivet started as a solid piece of metal, heated in a portable furnace until it glowed orange, then tossed to a waiting worker who hammered it into a pre-drilled hole before it cooled and hardened, locking 2 steel plates together permanently. It took a coordinated team to do this, a boy running heated rivets from the furnace at a sprint, a holder bracing the rivet from one side of the plate, and hammermen driving it home from the other, over and over, thousands of times a day. In spaces barely wide enough to fit a person, the clang of hammers echoing across the entire yard. In open areas, pneumatic hammers sped up the work, letting a smaller crew drive rivets faster than hand tools ever could. But in the tightest curves of the bow and stern, machines couldn't reach at all. Every rivet there had to be driven entirely by hand, one team working section by section along curves too tight for any machine to follow. 3 million rivets, and the ship's entire structural integrity depended on every single one being placed correctly. Chapter 4. Why bigger changed everything. Every problem Titanic's engineers solved seemed to create a bigger version of itself. Steel plates for a ship this size weren't small sheets. Some stretched 30 feet long and weighed several tons apiece. too heavy for ordinary dockyard equipment to lift and position with any precision. Existing cranes strained at the edge of their limits, which is exactly why the shipyard's new gantry crane mattered so much. Without it, plates this size simply couldn't be moved into place at all, let alone set against a curved hull with the precision the frame demanded. Weight distribution became its own engineering puzzle. As more steel went into the hull, engineers had to constantly account for how the growing structure's mass would settle once it hit the water, and how uneven loading during construction could warp a frame that had taken months to align. Materials had to arrive at the yard in a precise sequence. Too much steel too soon, and it had nowhere to go. Too little, and thousands of workers stood idle waiting on deliveries they couldn't control. Organizing the workforce itself became a logistics problem no shipyard had faced at this scale. Thousands of men, split across riveting gangs, platers, carpenters, and engineers, all had to move through the same construction site without one team's work blocking another's. None of these problems existed at a smaller scale. They only appeared because the ship kept growing past what the industry's existing tools and methods were built to handle. Chapter 5. Building a floating luxury hotel. Up to this point, every challenge had been about steel, weight, and structure. Now the project changed entirely. Inside that riveted hull, engineers had to build one of the most luxurious interiors ever put to sea. The grand staircase, crowned with a wrought iron and glass dome, wound down through multiple decks lit by electric light fixtures, wired through a ship that had none of that infrastructure a year earlier. Electric lighting had to be run through miles of cable across every deck, alongside plumbing and heating systems built to serve passengers who expected the comfort of a five-star hotel rather than a working vessel. Kitchens needed to feed thousands of people at once, staffed and equipped like a hotel kitchen many times over. Elevators had to be installed and tested, along with a swimming pool, a gymnasium, and cabins finished in carved wood paneling by craftsmen working alongside welders and riveters just decks away. None of this could happen until the structure beneath it was sound. Every luxury detail depended on the steel skeleton holding true. Engineers weren't just building a ship anymore. They were building a hotel that also had to survive the North Atlantic. Chapter 6. Launch day was only half the job. On May 31, 1911, Titanic's hull slid down the slipway and into the water for the first time, watched by tens of thousands of people crowding the banks of the river Lagan. To most of them, this looked like the finish line. It wasn't. What hit the water that day was an empty steel shell, no engines, no boilers, no funnels, none of the interior work that made the ship what it was. All of that still had to be built, and now it had to be built inside a floating hull instead of a fixed one on land, where nothing stayed perfectly still. Over the next 10 months, engineers lowered massive boilers and engines into place using that same floating crane, installed funnels large enough to walk through, and finished wiring, plumbing, and interior fittings throughout the ship, all while Titanic sat afloat at a fitting-out wharf, rather than braced on solid ground the way it had been for 2 years. Only after all of it was complete did the ship go through sea trials, testing engines, steering, and stopping distance before it was cleared to sail. Launch day hadn't finished the Titanic. It had just moved the hardest half of the job into the water. Chapter 7. The Engineering Legacy. Titanic didn't seem impossible because the engineers at Harland and Wolff lacked skill. It seemed impossible because nearly every part of the project outgrew the tools, cranes, and methods the shipbuilding industry already had. So the industry grew with it. Larger slipways, a taller gantry, heavier cranes, riveting teams coordinated at a scale no shipyard had organized before. Every obstacle Titanic created forced engineers to build something new, just to keep building the ship itself. And by the time it was finished, the industry that built it looked nothing like the one that had started the project 3 years earlier. Most people remember Titanic for what happened on one night in the North Atlantic. But long before that, thousands of engineers had already solved a problem many believed couldn't be solved: how to build the largest moving object humanity had ever created, using an industry that had to reinvent itself just to keep pace with its own ambition. The tragedy became history. The engineering changed shipbuilding forever.